Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Bob Fader. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and I want to welcome you all to what I think is going to be a really fascinating discussion tonight. Our guest tonight is Alan Weisman, an author, professor, and journalist. Alan has degrees in literature and journalism from Northwestern University and has served on the faculties of the University of Arizona, Prescott College, and Williams College. He's authored numerous books and reported for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Harper's, Atlantic, Mother Jones, and many other periodicals. His 2007 book, The World Without Us, is a look at what would happen to the natural world if humans disappeared. The World Without Us won multiple awards, including Time Magazine's Best Book of the Year. His 2013 book, Countdown, another multi-award winner, questions the viability of infinite growth in a finite world. His most recent book, published this year and which we'll be discussing tonight, is Hope Dies Last. This is a remarkable and inspiring book in which Alan travels to a dozen countries and documents the incredible work that courageous and innovative people are doing to try and prevent the environmental disasters we're facing, including climate change. I have a lot of questions to ask Alan about his book, which I'll be starting out the evening with. And then about halfway through, we will switch over to the audience and let people in the audience ask questions of Alan. I ask that people remain muted during my discussion with Alan and then raise their hands if they want to ask a question, and I will call on you. Alan, thanks again for being here.
My pleasure, Bob.
Okay.
I admire your organization, and it's great to be with you. So.
Well, it's great to have you. I actually want to start the discussion at the end of your book because it has two sections at the very end that I want to make sure people don't overlook. And those are the bibliography and the acknowledgement sections. The bibliography is just an amazing collection of almost every important new reference on environmental issues, and it can serve as a great reference to anyone. And then the acknowledgement section, is usually a part of the book most people don't even bother to read. But I encourage people to read your acknowledgement section because you actually tell some stories in there that you don't tell in the rest of the book, many of which are quite interesting. And you also talk there about meeting with two of our Climate Psychiatry Alliance founders, Lise Van Susteren and David Pollack. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that meeting and what impact it had on Hope Dies Last.
Well, first of all, the acknowledgments, thank you for acknowledging the acknowledgments because um, sometimes you see it in film these days. If people stick through the credits, the director throws in an extra scene there, and it's basically testing your loyalty. There are lots of things that, first of all, I have a lot of people to thank. I talk to so many people. Uh, in the case of this book and why my meetings with David and Lisa end up in the acknowledgments, I started thinking, well, I've been thinking for years about what my next book should be. My editor of my last two books, and I would have these phone conversations, and at the end of which he would say, "Man, do you think there's any hope?" And finally, we decided maybe hope is the frame that we were looking for. Um, I had actually been thinking about cognitive dissonance, which is, I think, what led me to you people first, because this idea of the mass cognitive dissonance, science is telling us we are running out of places to store exhaust from our energy systems in the atmosphere, and we're running out of places to grow food on this planet without running all these other species off of it. And yet, here we go. And this means all of us, on one track, we're headed towards this amazing, dazzling future that gives us technologies like the one that we're talking to each other on right now. On the other, we're just going off a cliff. But we kept going. And my editor didn't think that cognitive dissonance was such a hot item that it would jump off the bookshelves at people. But I really wanted to look at hope, which I do in the second chapter of this book, and then in other places. Is what does it mean at a time of existential crisis? What is the meaning of hope really now? What are our realistic hopes? I didn't want this book to be Pollyannish. I wanted to know what uh, we can realistically expect upcoming, and is there a way that we can find ourselves a path through this bottleneck century? Um, Ultimately, my research turned up um, your, Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and I recognized a name in there. David Pollock was this guy that I went to college with. Hadn't seen him for years, but found a picture of him, and sure enough, that was him. So I got in touch with him, and we started conversing, and he told me about other people. It happened that I was going to Washington, D.C. for some interviews. So I called up Lise von Susteren, who I don't think she's with us tonight. Is she? I don't know. Maybe I'm not seeing everybody on the screen, but she and I met at a very tense moment in Washington, D.C., and we sat down for a lunch that just kept going and going and going. So while I've been researching this book, I have stayed in touch with both of them. But I want to make this point. I was really interested in you guys because your idea of climate anxiety becoming a principal source of anxiety to people in the upcoming years was really a vanguard idea. And it was kind of an outlier idea in your profession and among psychologists as well. By the time I got into this book, which was delayed for 2 years because of the pandemic, I had gone to 3 countries and I had to sit around waiting for things to ease. But by the time I got back into it, and particularly when I was writing, the idea was now center stage. Everybody understood that climate anxiety was a real thing. And I think that your pioneering work had a lot to do with that. So my editor and I decided it really wasn't going to be that new information for readers, but to me it was really important to get it in there because I had such powerful encounters talking to both David and Lisa, and so that's how this happened.
Okay, thanks. Alan, your book describes many people that, against all odds, are waging admirable struggles to do something about changing the environmentally disastrous course the Earth is headed on. What were the common characteristics that you saw among these people?
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't read the book, I mean, I have a wide swath of humanity in here, not just a dozen countries, but people from all walks of life. I mean, some of them are engineers, some of them are scientists, some of them are just normal, everyday people. There are artists, there are architects, there's even military people. And what I found that they had in common was they were very imaginative. I use the word visionary, and it's not a word that I take lightly, but each of them just stubbornly refused to quit trying to find us a future. And these were people who were not starry-eyed. These people, because they were so focused on what they were doing, they understood completely what the odds were that we were facing. But um, I never heard any of them use the word impossible, except one of them says impossible is usually a failure of imagination. I mean, these are people for whom hope is an active verb, not just passively wishing for something to happen. They don't wait around for miracles. They go out there and try to make them.
Thanks. Um, in your book, you talk about three things that we need to do to survive as a species. One is cool the earth. The second is stopping the extinction of other species. And the third is finding a way to produce enough food that doesn't make these other two things worse. Do you feel optimistic about any of these three things at present?
Well, first of all, I need to correct you on cool the earth because we are not going to cool it. What we have already put into the atmosphere is going to be there for quite a while. And with luck, we can get a lot of the methane out very, very quickly, and that will definitely help. But there's enough carbon dioxide up there that this is going to be a changed planet. Uh, and what our goal is to not to slow that change and to make it stop in its tracks, hopefully, so we don't get to a point where it's unlivable for other species. Um, I mean, it's important to understand that, this planet has been through some really tremendous episodes of increased carbon dioxide because of huge volcanic activity in the past. And during the Jurassic time, there was like 1,600 parts per million of um, CO2 in the atmosphere, and we're worried about 430 right now. There was a lot of life going on. It was just different life. And I don't think that we are going to be able to survive at 1,600, and we don't want to find out what the upper limit is. So, do I find hope? I would say that the thing I'm most optimistic about right now is that we can create all the energy we need on this planet without burning anything. Um, I think you mentioned that you saw me with Bill McKibben. We were on a panel together last month. Bill's got a new book out called Here Comes the Sun, and it's all about the incredible uptick of implementation of an improvement of solar technology, chiefly photovoltaic cells, which I guess China is making like 100 PV panels a second now, and batteries. And again, I'm going to talk about China. It's a country that I visited a lot in the past, and uh, it's easy to get depressed in the United States right now because basically, since the 1980s, the oil industry, which knew what their product was doing, carefully prepared, but first by, buying candidates for school boards and for state legislatures, and then buying Congress people. And it's easy in the United States. We've only two-party system. You only have to pay two bribes. That's not so expensive. And now they bought themselves the White House. Uh, the Heritage Foundation that wrote Project 2025, that is Trump's Bible for drill, baby, drill. Uh, that's oil money speaking to us. But you go outside of the United States, and the rest of the world is just leaving us in the dust. China is now making dozens of models in all price ranges of electric vehicles. The ranges start, around 250 miles per charge, and they've now got batteries that charge in 5 minutes, which is about the time it takes us to fill our tanks of dirty gasoline. So it's good to step out of the United States for a while and realize that this battle is not all lost, and the energy sector is really leading the way.
Thanks. Going to go towards the end of your book again. Uh, the Jewish people just a few days ago celebrated Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which retells the story of Abraham. The last chapter of your book takes place near the ancient city of Ur, currently in modern day Iraq, which was Abraham's birthplace. Can you tell us what this area is going through now and what you learned there?
Well, I started this book intentionally, and this is something that psychiatrists will really understand, in a place that had a real emotional wallop. The top of the Persian Gulf, ancient Mesopotamia, which is where Ur was, uh, is the oldest cradle of civilization on the planet, certainly the cradle of Western civilization. And it's also the birthplace of three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham was the patriarch of those religions. And, I talk about him earlier in the book. In the first chapter starts in Iraq, and later I get back to it. Um, frankly, Abraham doesn't come off all that great in the Old Testament, which I read the Old Testament a lot in my research for this book. Um, you know, he's basically he was either hearing voices in his head, and you guys are the experts on that one, or um, he just made the whole thing up about Yahweh and to justify a land grab. It's when you go to Ur today, it's basically desert sands. Part of the ziggurat has been restored, but when the Tigris or when the Euphrates River moved away from Ur and later Uruk, those cities kind of died. Um, but it was a lush place. So why Abraham left there, or his father really, is kind of a mystery. But en route to going to where he went, I mean, the way he uses his wife um, as, basically as chattel, and he uses, frankly, her vagina as a shield. In two different places, he tricks kings into thinking that she's his sister, and actually she was his half sister. So they would sleep with her and not kill him. Today we think, well, those values were acceptable back then. That's what we heard about the polygamy and all that, when we were in Sunday school or Hebrew school or whatever. But come on, you guys are psychiatrists. This has never been acceptable. I'm sure that Sarah didn't really appreciate being used the way that she was being used. Um, Toward the end of the book, when I go to Ur, I continue then up the Euphrates. I visit Samuel, which was one of the many places where the Jews during the exile to Babylon, uh, when they were kidnapped by Nebuchadnezzar, they formed those Jewish academies that began to write down what were then oral teachings into what we now call the Babylonian Talmud, which is, the source of Jewish thought. I went to the reconstruction of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, and as I mentioned, this is also where the book of Joshua was written. Um, and I don't want to veer off topic too much, but I talk about that ever so briefly, but I hope tellingly at the end of the book, because this was after the Hamas invasion of Israel. But frankly, a slaughter of the innocents, which was how Israel justified what they're doing in Gaza today, their playbook could have been the book of Joshua. I mean, the Israelites go to 33 cities and they murder every man, woman, and child. I mean, really, was that necessary? Um, Tellingly, it's in the book of Joshua. They left a couple of cities at the end. They were just tired of battle. And one of the ones that they left was Gaza. So here we are.
Uh, Alan, you describe a remarkable wireless solar-powered sharing system in Bangladesh, I think called Soulbox and SoulShare. Can you explain how this works and what it could offer the rest of the world?
Yeah, I I love this story. It may be the most hopeful story in the book in many ways, because I particularly love it because I found it in one of the worst places on earth. I found it in a Rohingya refugee camp on the Bangladesh-Myanmar border, where you've got, 1 million+ people living in these horrible, stifling one-room huts. Uh, and ex except this one sector that I was taken to, where outside of these huts, which are wrapped in black plastic, um, the you see these little bamboo antennas with something little electric apparatus on top of it, and there's a small solar panel on top of each of these huts. Inside each hut has got fluorescent bulb, uh, an electric fan, which they told me was life-changing for them, and the ability to charge mobile phones or a tablet for a kid who is taking classes. And there's also this box which has a couple of um, buttons on it. One says buy and the other says sell. What it means, there's a meter to tell how much energy they've got left in their battery that's been charging with the solar panel all day. But that meter is done in currency, not in kilowatt hours, and nobody really understands anyhow. Uh, what happens is that all of these huts are connected to the surrounding huts wirelessly. And all the neighbors, if they've got extra energy left in their battery at the end of the day, they can push sell, and any of their neighbors who need more energy can push buy. It's an energy trading system. Each cluster of huts is surrounded by another cluster, etc. And when I got there, this program was just beginning. They were working on 100 huts. And unfortunately, problems with the United Nations, partly having to do with our funding, um, has suspended the program, but there's hopes that it will be completed because you can have, an infinite number of clusters without any overhead infrastructure. Everybody buying and selling their energy to each other. And SoulShare, which is a company in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the capital, has also started outfitting and connecting Bangladesh's 3 million plus electric rickshaws with solar rechargeable batteries, whose remaining juice each night gets fed into the national grid, which can really help with the rolling blackouts out there. So, solar PV is now so cheap. Bill McKibben was telling me in Pakistan, farmers are just laying sheets of it on the ground to power their pumps. And that was really powerful to hear that for me because in my last book, I was in India, in the Punjab. The Punjab is partly in Pakistan, partly in India. But so many farmers there had despaired of pumping the cost of having to pump deeper for water that they were committing suicide, and usually symbolically by drinking pesticide. Like 250,000 farmers in or more in India. And, I don't know if the Pakistanis are now going to empty their aquifer with solar energy. That's another issue. But this, like in Bangladesh, is clean, it's technically easy, everybody saves money, and it just makes so much sense.
Hmm. Uh, Alan, in your book, you talk about the need for a strong miracle to arrest global warming. And three that are mentioned are usable fusion energy, carbon dioxide capture directly from the air, and carbon dioxide capture by the ocean. Which of these look promising to you at present?
Well, I also mentioned a fourth, and that's going to be one of the ones that gives me hope that we might be able to accomplish something. First of all, carbon capture, and sometimes they call it carbon capture and sequestration. I mean, forget it. This is both a pipe dream. I've been on the geoengineering listserv for over a decade watching these guys talk about this stuff. And they're no closer. There's a technique that a professor at Harvard has one that can capture emissions out of smokestacks, but the cost for scaling up would be astronomical. Not to mention anything about all the mining of the metal to build all these machines. and then figuring out what to do with the carbon, where and how to bury it. It's not going to happen. This is a stalling tactic that is being promoted by petroleum, gas, and coal companies simply to prolong what they're doing, or in hopes that they can keep doing it because we can just capture it magically. So don't believe in that. But I also, you know, because, well, I alluded to it before. I mean, solar panels on our rooftops, that would be enough to power this world. Uh, it's not going to happen overnight. Energy has been a commodity. It's been monopolized by central utilities. And if we wait to change capitalism and change the system all over the world, the planet's going to be lost. So I looked at two different technologies that centralized utilities would be able to substitute for burning stuff. One of them um, is fusion, nuclear fusion, the stuff that powers the stars. And there's been a joke about it that it's always been 30 years down the line and always will be. Uh, and that's because we know how to do it on Earth, but stabilizing the plasma, which is gas with superheated gas that's inside of stars, stabilizing it on Earth, and then getting it those atoms in it so hot that they fuse together. And as Einstein told us, a little bit of mass is lost when that happens, and you get an extraordinary amount of energy, and it's radiation free and carbon free. But it's always taken more energy to make that reaction happen and so to sustain it on Earth than we get out of it. I went to see the leading company. There's several companies around the world who are really trying to do something about this now. And in my book, it's kind of a thrilling story where a professor at MIT who teaches plasma fusion and sort of at the end of his rope and wondering if he should change careers, challenges his fusion plant design class, populated by what he calls every year the 23 or the most brilliant 23-year-olds on Earth. And he challenged them to come up with a way of doing it with, but on a scale that would be commercial. The drawback there has always been that to hold plasma stable, you need powerful magnets. They're building this one. Half the nations on Earth are partners in this thing with magnets that weigh 3,800 tons apiece in France, and it's decades over schedule. His students came up with a way of shrinking those magnets by a factor of 40. And they are right now they're building the prototype for a commercial plant that they've already got a site for that and customers for that. Google's one of their customers. And if it happens, this is basically limitless energy. It's powered by seawater. Uh, a quart of it will power your life for a year, and it's recyclable. Uh, it's energy without mining anything, without burning anything, and without radiation. The other one, which I also mentioned briefly in the book because I only got to see it in its incipient experimental stages, is something they colloquially call it hot dry rock. A plasma physicist also at MIT realized that the limitation of drilling has always been that if you drill down far enough, because anywhere on Earth, if you drill down far enough, you're going to reach heat. And theoretically, you could then put water down there, capture the steam that comes up and turn a turbine. But the limitation was that after a while, the drills will start to melt. And it takes a long time. It took 20 years to go like 12 kilometers in Russia, the deepest tunnel. He realized that a super laser that they use for stabilizing plasma, maybe what would happen if they pointed it at the ground? Because a laser beam isn't going to melt. Well, he tried it on some basalt, And not only did it drill through that thing amazingly fast, but the hole turned to glass, which avoids the whole cost and time of steel casing all the way down. So they may have a prototype. They may actually have a commercial plant. They're going for 2028. And that's really exciting because we do those things anywhere. They would fit the footprint of a coal-fired plant or a gas-fired plant, and you could hook up to existing um, transmission lines, and the centralized utilities could, they'll still charge us too much, but they won't be mining anything. It'll be clean. So this is, exciting stuff. And when you meet these engineers and technicians who are doing this, they're on the same mission that you're on. They know what we're up against, and they are racing to make these things happen.
I want to turn to politics a little bit now. One of my favorite quotes from your book is that scientists should be making scientific decisions, not politicians. One of your chapters talks about the history of climate work in Ithaca, New York, which has run into multiple political and practical bottlenecks. And if a liberal town like Ithaca can't succeed in setting up local climate change programs, can anybody?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, the Ithaca approach was really brilliant. Not only was it a way to retrofit every house, but it was a way to come up with, over $100 million in financing by showing banks that they can actually make a profit out of making low interest loans to people of modest means who would be usually considered risks. There are ways to cover those risks. And the differential between, what they were saving with new efficient technology, like heat pumps, etc., would allow them to pay back those loans. But you're right, there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape and a lot of jealousies, that happen in, town councils. Um, but it's also true that retrofitting all the existing infrastructure to accommodate electric heating, cooking, water heating, insulation, that can get hefty. It's if everybody's using electric power, that also means that the things that come from the power lines to your house, they're going to have to be retrofitted too. So that's another reason why I was looking at the possibility of not just rooftop distributed solar, but also, radically alternative centralized utilities. It's I leave hanging at the end of that chapter how feasible these ideas are. Because, Ithaca is a city of 50,000 when all the college students are there. And it was going to be, over $1 billion to retrofit every single household. But if we come up with enough PV, and if one or the other or both of those other technologies that I mentioned come through, and so far the science is encouraging, then it may be that we don't have to retrofit everything right away to get us on the right path. I mean, certainly, heat pumps, the sooner we can install them, the better. And one of the brilliant ideas that the people had in Ithaca was heat pumps get a lot cheaper when you buy them in bulk. Uh, there's a story in the Netherlands in my book about a woman who challenges the government of the Netherlands, why their subsidized programs for people putting solar on their rooftops still ended up costing 90,000 euros per household. And they said, because that's what it costs. So she basically she's runs an organization there. You may have another question about them, and I'd love to talk about them. But she gets them to pool their money together. She flies to China. She buys 50,000 cheap solar panels and all the fittings, brings them back. And today in the Netherlands, for 30,000 euros, you can completely electrify your house. Uh, they provide For 30,000, you get an induction stove, you get the heat pumps you need, you get a solar water heater, uh, and that's why, 2 million out of 7 million Dutch houses right now are on solar power.
Okay, well, I'll ask you a question about the Dutch and then we'll turn it over to our audience. You actually talk about the Dutch a lot in your book. They appear in numerous chapters. And in one, you describe a couple of legal cases that occurred in the Netherlands. One was the Urgenda case, and then the 2019 climate WEC, which these cases established legally binding targets of 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050. Do you think such a legal approach to climate change is achievable anywhere else in the world at this time?
Well, I think it's achievable any place where they really have functioning courts and a real separation of powers. We used to have that here. We don't seem to anymore. Uh, I'm going to find out, I guess, because in a couple of days I'm going to the UK for a book event, and I will ask if they could do it there. Interesting, the leader of the environmental group that I'm going to be speaking to is a guy named Alan Lee. He's the artist who illustrated the Tolkien books and he designed the Lord of the Rings movies. So I'm going to ask him if he thinks it's just a fantasy that this can happen. But the UK did just close their last coal-fired plant, so I think that that's a hopeful sign. In the case of the Dutch, this woman, Marianne Manesma, um, who is one of the people who everybody said that the stuff that she did, was impossible, and she just said, I thought it was possible. I mean, what she did was meet an attorney who had written a book about how the courts are really the last resort when it comes to climate change, and that if governments don't fulfill all these fancy treaties and UN agreements and stuff like that that they have all signed for industrialized countries to lower their emissions, then you just have to sue them. So she amassed 850 plaintiffs from her environmental group, Urgenda, and the youngest was 5 years old, and they marched on the government, and they delivered this suit, and everybody thought that it wasn't going to fly, and but the reasoning, using the government's own documents, things that it had agreed to do and never had done any of it. It was just a name only. Um, you know, the courts had to agree that they were correct. And then the Dutch government appealed on 29 grounds and didn't do anything because they thought it would all be thrown out. And then all 29 grounds survived on appeal, and then they went up to the Supreme Court and they survived. So, it just takes someone to say yes. I mean, this is what I heard repeatedly from these people. You know, how do we know it won't work unless we try? Because if we don't try, failure is guaranteed. So,
Well, we had a smaller scale victory of a similar sort in this country last year in the Held versus Montana case, where a group of young people successfully sued the state of Montana over greenhouse gas emissions. And Lise Van Strasten actually was one of the major testifiers in that case for these group of young plaintiffs, which we were very proud of her for. Okay, I'm going to ask our
wait,
audience now to,
um,
Alan,
can I just add one thing because I
sure.
I didn't answer your question about the Netherlands completely. The Netherlands is prominent in my book because suddenly every country in the world is going to the Netherlands to figure out how they've managed to stop from drowning over the, past 1,000 years. The Dutch, 2/3 of the Dutch live below sea level or at sea level, and they've come up with these amazing tools for stopping storm surges, and they've learned how to accommodate to rivers in brilliant ways. And everybody's trying to buy their technology. And I went there and I spent about 2 weeks touring everything with engineers there. And it's brilliant and it's fabulous. Um, and it's paid for itself. Their total outlay was like $5 billion, and Hurricane Katrina, which is, New Orleans is one of their customers now. That costs much more than that. Um, but even the Dutch engineers, I saw admitted to me, they said, that they think they are perfectly safe, maybe until 2050. And then if seas keep rising, if we can't slow this, well, what's going to happen? They don't know. Um, you know, um, Migration is one of the ways that people are dealing with climate change right now. It's one of the biggest drivers of refugee activity on the planet. And imagine two-thirds of the Dutch moving to higher ground. So I'm going to talk about this in the UK. I mean, they've got some scenarios that at first seemed very far-fetched. Now they're looking at them seriously. One of them is a dam that would go from Brittany, France, to Cornwall, and then from the top of England across the Hebrides, um, in the Orkneys from Scotland to Norway. And basically, it would contain the North Sea. The Dutch would turn it into a freshwater lake, as they are good at doing. But the ecological change would be really vast. And then those rivers, the Netherlands is the drain of Europe. That's why it's so low. It's all a delta. Those rivers would then be pumped over a wall, we guess, into the Atlantic. I mean, people are starting to talk seriously about this. But even if that sounds really, really far-fetched and crazy to you, understand uh, our coastlines are going to change. That is already baked in now. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, people in the audience, if you'd like to ask Alan a question, raise your hand electronically, and I'll call on folks. If you're having trouble with the hand raising, you can go into the chat and we'll try and catch you there. Beth Haas, what you got?
Hey, Alan, thank you for the book. It's really a great read. Um,
Thank you, Jeff.
my question is about us, having done this work now. We often struggle with people asking us, so are you guys like about fixing like all the stress and anxiety, or are you guys about helping people like advance climate change by overcoming the obstacles? Like which one are you doing, right? And so my question for you is, having done this book, where do you think we should be in terms of our focus psychiatrically, in terms of how we can best help people emotionally?
I think, I'm not a professional like you are, but I can look at my own life and I listen to all these people that I talk to. And I talk to, in my research, a lot of people who are in despair, who feel paralyzed by their fear about all this. And at one point in the book, I say, look, even the climate deniers know that this is happening. They're just lying to themselves for reasons that you understand very well, or they're making so much money at it, they're lying to us. But the fearful people, well, I use the word paralyzed. The most therapeutic thing I have found in my own life, and that these people have described to me, is you get out and you do something. Uh, hope as an active verb. And everybody can do something out there. There is a group to join, be it an environmental group or a legal support group. There are a zillion different ways to help the climate. You can come up with financing for your own community to buy solar panels in common. My house in my little town of 800 is fully solar now. That's what we did with the surrounding towns. We all got together and we took bids from solar providers and we evaluated them economically, And we also looked really hard. We did 3 years of research to look at their record of support. And this can be done. It certainly has made my life cleaner and cheaper too. Yeah, we make money from our solar panels because we are grid tied here in Massachusetts, where I am. So there are absolutely things to do. There's something else in this. Your question might be a good place to bring this up. I'm oftentimes asked in the Q&As, what do we tell kids? And I say, you don't tell kids anything because they know so damn much now. Anyhow, they get it through their phones, but it's what you can show them. And one of the things you show them is take them out into nature. You know, and even the most recalcitrant kid, the kid who doesn't want to let go of his or her screen or whatever, you get them on a walk out in nature, and pretty soon they're going to see something that interests them. And the next time you go, they're going to be explaining it to you because they're going to have looked it all up. And nature is one of the ways to really, really restore our spirits because we all spring from nature and our bodies remember that. But there's also going to be a point when those kids, particularly the teenagers, are going to be looking into what's going on in the world and they're going to realize that humanity has overdone it on this planet and they're going to get angry. And actually, anger is very justifiable, but not if you let that anger, again, paralyze you or just trap you so much that you don't think that there's any hope. So I also tell people, make sure you take your kids to concerts, to art galleries, to museums, to let them see some of the finest expressions of the beauty that our species is also capable of creating. I mean, I found personally that art is one of the ways that just absolutely refills my soul after I come back from one of these reporting missions that sometimes can get pretty grim. Um, I'm fortunate I'm married to an artist and we joke that I'm truth and she's beauty, but it's true. I mean, I mention her in those acknowledgments because she points out that beauty is not a limited resource. We can always create more of it. And I think if you raise kids, and you'll be doing yourself a favor too, on both the arts and on nature, and then getting out and actually doing something, that to me is the best prescription I can think of.
Yeah, thank you. What a lovely answer.
Peter Whitehouse, you have a question for Alan?
Thank you, Alan. Yes, my question actually relates to Beth's and your answer to Beth. I'm thinking through a grand rounds I'll be giving in psychiatry on the role of mental health in the meta crisis and what new framings we need in order to address challenges that are being given names that you didn't use in your book. Solastalgia, for example, this alienation we have from the lives we've lived. And I wonder if I could just focus your answer on nature around trees and forests. I did a Google search, so I did a search of your book to see where you use the word forest and trees, because you end with the story of Gilgamesh. The history of human civilization has been written in many ways by our relationships to trees and forests. And do you think the psychiatrist of the future will be a tree?
Um, I could make a bad joke here and say that it might be a lot cheaper just to go out and hang out with a tree for an hour. But you know, for my last book, I was with the Theravada monks Buddhist monks in Thailand. And that's a forest in a spiritual tradition, forest based. Uh, as I mentioned before, and I talk about it in the beginning of my book, The World Without Us, when I go to this last fragment of primeval European forest on the Polish-Belarusian border, where you go in there, you see these giant trees, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before, except it just feels familiar because your body tends to remember. So I think that combining the insights of your profession, because I think that those are really important insights, in a nature setting, um, that might beat sitting in an office. It's for you to experiment with, and I'm sure that some of you already have. I will say that, we're at a very, very um, trying time where we're watching a lot of our forests come down. And it was, and I talk about this in the acknowledgments. When I first contacted David Pollock, I was really interested that David was a public health psychiatrist. And he was thinking about and has worked in his career with the idea of mass trauma. What happens when there is a disaster? And then later on, his own house outside of Portland is surrounded on three sides by fire. He was almost a victim himself. And another story that I mentioned in the acknowledgments, was a woman from Paradise, California, the town that completely burned down. Her dad was the biggest contractor there, not only her own home that she grew up in, but homes that basically she saw her father build. They all came down. And her job was as a hospital social worker in Chico, California, half an hour away. So she received all of her traumatized neighbors and they became her patients while she was dealing with her own trauma. Well, that's what a lot of us are going to be dealing with, and we have to think about these things. Forests have come down repeatedly in Earth's history. They get succeeded then. And sometimes there's real beauty in the succession. I mean, you can see that in some of the clear-cut areas of Oregon. If you all remember when Yellowstone burned and they let nature do its job of burning, it came back just more beautiful than ever. And that's a lesson that sometimes, you know, I could talk about your question for a long time here.
Yeah, that reminds me of the practice that some holistic therapists are using now, called forest bathing, which has its origins in some Japanese traditions. Basically, a form of relaxation therapy by just bathing in the forest. Robin, you have a question?
Bob, I just want to get a time check for you because I have a number of things that I'd like to ask Alan about, but are we going to stay a bit longer? That we're coming on the hour, so just a time check-in for you.
Well, I think we'll stay as long as people have questions to ask. So
I'm all yours. So,
Love it, love it.
okay.
Um, so I have several questions. But I'm going to one ask you to reflect on. You told us about these extraordinary technological solutions or technological things that are within the realm of possibility when you talked about these changes with nuclear fusion and the plasma fusion. But you contrast that with carbon capture as something we should not put our hopes behind. Why do you think carbon capture has generated so much interest and is stuff people know about? But these things that you've described that are now technologically on the cutting edge and possible are not being kind of drawn to. They seem like you also said to us, we shouldn't wait till we defeat capitalism. But it does seem like there's money to be made in some of these technological activities that you've identified.
Well, there absolutely is. But if you were a farrier, or a mule skinner 150 years ago, or a buggy whip manufacturer, you would not have been so crazy about this new technology that was coming up because it was going to uh, make your livelihood obsolete. Look, what we are seeing here is the possibly last grand war of civilization. Civilization, all of this incredible stuff that we have, was fueled by burning concentrated energy that we found in the ground, starting with coal, and then about 150 years ago, we started using oil in a big way. And it became, again, monopolized by a few wealthy people, starting with the Rockefellers, and made them an enormous amount of money. These people don't want to stop making money by doing something new when they can still do something that they already know how to do and they don't have to invest in new technology. Um, that's why someone, in the fusion sector told me that what we have to do is not just give them something else that they can do, but make it cheaper for them to do that than it is to mine all that coal and oil and gas that they still have in the ground. I mean, that's why,
Yes, but we
that's,
already,
excuse me, Robin, let me finish. That's why you are hearing so much about carbon capture, because it is a way that the oil industry will be able, they hope will be able to keep burning stuff because we'll capture the carbon out of
right,
the atmosphere. Not
right.
going to happen. It's all well-paid propaganda. These people have a lot of money. They own an entire television network now, and they own the presidency and the Supreme Court of this country. And I'm sorry if I'm stepping on anybody's political toes here. I do not belong to any political party and never have. But and as you probably noticed, Joe Biden doesn't come off so great in my book either. But this is the situation we have right now. We've got new technologies that would either put them out of business or
Yeah,
maybe force them into adapting something new, which lo and behold, they're going to find out actually is really not that expensive. The great thing about that drilling hot, dry rock, we've got a ready-made um, uh, industrial or worker base for this already. Oil drillers, you know, they will transfer seamlessly over into being able to use a laser rather than clanking drills that melt down.
yeah. Yes, you've made that clear. It's that carbon capture doesn't give up their profitability in drilling.
Yeah.
I have other questions, but Karen's hand is up too.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, well, I'm going to try um, first to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm always so deeply grateful when I can read something that inspires me or gives me a feeling of possibility. Um, I actually had a meeting today with a group of colleagues, not about climate change, but issues like this were being talked about, and they were all mental health professionals struggling to maintain some balance with what's going on in the world right now. But I have a couple thoughts about what we can do as clinicians. I'm very clinically oriented, sort of psychotherapy oriented psychiatrist. Um, and um, as Beth knows, I one of the things that I spent my career working with very complex trauma, adults who were severely mistreated as kids, and so I spent a lot of time in the world of learning about and understanding dissociation. I looking at what's going on with patients and colleagues. I'm really the point that I'm really most struggling with is that climate denial is not denial. It's a kind of not knowing. It's a very remarkable thing that can be done, that people who are very bright and very capable know what's going on, but they don't know. And I feel as educators and clinicians, that's a place that we can help people, not by lecturing and not by, coercing, but by helping people recognize that they actually know more about this than they realize. I've often, in stuff that I've written, I talk about, that the CEOs of these energy companies have grandchildren. I went, you were talking about nature. I took my 3-year-old granddaughter for a little walk down to a dock on our lake, and where she wanted to throw stones and pebbles in. And we were sitting there and we heard this noise on the tree. And she's 3.5. And I said, listen to that. And she said, it's a woodpecker. And we walked back up the trail a little bit, looked up the tree, and there was the woodpecker. And my feeling was this: she's noticing, she's hearing, and she's noticing. And this is what we are losing in this current culture, this Western culture. Clearly there are other cultures in the world where people listen and hear. But so I just wanted to say that I think mental health clinicians can be engaged on that level and actually on a very simple level make some difference.
Of course, you can make some difference. You, like me in my profession as a journalist, uh, your art is in getting people to talk about themselves. I mean, this is something that I talk to young journalists about all the time. Um, when I go see a scientist, and I learned this at Northwestern, David, uh, uh, um, I would go to the Technological Institute there when I was in grad school and I have to talk to these scientists about this just arcane stuff that they were studying. Um, it was like way beyond me. So what I learned to do was to say, thank you, Miss Scientist, for being willing to talk to me. I really appreciate it because you're studying something that I know that it's important, and I really appreciate you telling me about it. But first of all, could you tell me, how did you get interested in this molecule that you're studying, or for that matter, how did you become a scientist in the first place? And then suddenly, I'm doing something that you guys do very well. You're getting people to talk about themselves, which we're all the centers of our own universes. And subconsciously, this person starts to like me because I'm interested in the same thing that they are subconsciously interested in. And they warm up, and oftentimes they tell me this really interesting story about how they became passionate about something that turns out to be the story that my readers will follow, because readers, and when I get technical with them right away, they get lost. But if I hook it, you see me do this in my book. If I hook it to a scientist, I can get you even inside of a plasma fusion reactor, and you're excited because these kids are excited about what they're doing. Um, as therapists, I think that, first of all, I think everybody on the planet knows that climate is changing. They know the weather's changing. They know that their flights are delayed all the time. They know that they had a drought or too much water, or stuff is happening. And sometimes you just have to go to them where they're at, in their profession or in their lives or in their homes, and ask them what changes that they are seeing, and then it will start to flow.
Robin, did you have something else?
While I was listening, I did, but while I was listening to Karen and Alan, it occurred to me that there's a link in what you're both saying. Karen, when you talk about denial and thus the profound ways that people have to erect not knowing, um, because it is too big to know. It connected with what I think, Alan, you have given us in many ways that you started, I think, this conversation with something about miracles, that there are many little miracles in so many places. Some of them are small, some of them are big and complex, some of them are super trained people, and some of them are people making solutions in their own little communities. And it seemed to me that, Alan, you've given us something that when there are things that we can actually do, then maybe what Karen is saying, the sense that not knowing doesn't have to be so profoundly kind of resurrected.
Yeah, do something positive, even just do one little positive thing every day, and it'll change your day. Personally, I would add that one of the positive things that every human being can do is get some exercise because your mind feels better when your body feels better. That's just, that's a truism that everyone from the yogis to I wish more people in the medical profession really understood. Um, but you just said something really important, Robin, when you were that I hadn't thought about. You talked about one of the problems that can lead to denial is just the vastness of everything, of just like, what can you do about all of this stuff? I start out my books like that, like, oh my God, I've taken on this another vast global existential question for this book. And I'm in a total panic in the beginning. And then gradually I start by just talking to one person and oh, that's interesting. And there's an idea I hadn't thought of. And I ask that person who else I should talk to. And then suddenly, this whole networky thing starts to happen. Therapeutically, I think doing one good thing, one positive thing is a really good way to start. And the good thing about the climate problem, and this also, we haven't talked much about species extinction, but this would also apply because it involves habitat preservation. Um, but there are so many ways, just on a local level, that you can really make a difference. And it's a difference that you can walk outside of your home and you can feel pride in that. And even if people live in tall apartment buildings, uh, there's a world of wonder that you can create on your balcony, including right now. And it's starting to be legal in the United States. It is all over Europe. It's a huge breakthrough called balcony solar. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but you just hang this flexible solar panel off your balcony and you plug it in any outlet, and suddenly, this stuff is happening. Well, you can do that with window boxes, and you can do that with plants, and you can attract birds, and you can attract pollinators. Um, as I showed in my book, The World Without Us, nature's incredibly resilient. It will break down just the most sterile human-built environment given a chance. And if you invite nature in by improving the environment around your dwelling, whatever it is, nature will take advantage of that. Um, it's it's heartening. And doing something positive, joining a group, sending money to a group, whatever it is, that makes you feel better. Uh, I just, I can't say that enough. Do something, you know.
Alan, in regard to balcony solar, it's actually illegal in the United States right now because of electrical, licensing requirements and whatnot. But there are three states that are trying to pave the way right now and legalize it, which are Utah, Vermont, and New Hampshire.
Exactly.
Interesting trio of states.
Yeah. Well, some of the states are our best providers of alternative energy. I mean, Texas between wind and solar. I mean, it's huge. Some of them are obfuscating. Like Arizona passes these crazy laws in California too, meaning you have to pay to put solar on your roof. You know, that's that's nuts. Some of you may know my book Gaviotas that I wrote back in the 90s, and it was about a village in Colombia way off the grid because there was no infrastructure out there. So they designed all this stuff just to see if it's possible to live isolated away from overgrown cities and guerrilla wars and all the stuff that Colombia had going on. And they became immensely successful. They're still going today. Um, and their solar energy just they didn't wait around for anybody to give them permission to do it. They just sort of came up with it themselves. And th when I was touring that book, I met a lot of solar pioneers in the United States. Most of them were dope growers. They lived off grid, oftentimes like outside of like Humboldt, California, and places like that. And they were using solar panels, and they had become very, very sneaky of ways that they could connect up their stuff that nobody knew about. And that's already happening with solar balconies as well.
David, do you have a question for your old friend?
I do. I have a thank you, and I'm so glad that we reconnected after all these years. And
Yeah, me too.
I don't know if anyone saw it, but I put in the chat the link to the session that Alan and Kate Marvel did at the Library of Congress. It's a really beautiful conversation that they had, and I highly encourage people to watch it. It's only an hour long. Um, one of the things I'm gleaning from what you're describing, one of them is this get active. And when we early on in the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, we're talking about what are we going to do about people who are having anxiety and eco anxiety and depression and mood swings and so forth. One of the first things we said was, let's, before we start medicating people, encourage them to get active in their community. And it's been really a mainstay, I think, of how people
Right.
should approach the psychological problem. Now, we've had a wish to try to get to these big organizations like BetterHelp that are advertising online, all these therapists around the country. They haven't yet responded to our efforts to try to provide free education to their therapists, but that would be part of it. The other thing I want to remind you of and others is most of the people I see on the screen are old like me. And, my focus in getting into this was about my granddaughter and my daughter's generations. And so it's really great to see young people becoming more active in all of these suits from our Children's Trust and others that have been really moving and getting people to be so much more energized. Greta Thunberg, for example, and all of the work she's done. So it makes me feel more hopeful as well, because we're not going to be around much longer, and they're going to have to carry the weight and hopefully get over their bitterness about what our generation and prior generations have done to them.
Yeah, towards the end of the book, I talk about a Gen Z um, climate organization that just got tired of all you know, the old politicians, the old CEOs of corporations, and unfortunately, even some of the old people who are running environmental groups for, just this status quo that is killing us. And they very rightfully, pointed the finger at the Biden administration. I mean, look, we all felt a lot better when Joe Biden was president. But we were kidding ourselves in many ways to think that, okay, things are going to be good if we just keep having presidents like Biden or Kamala. No, I mean, really, they they had enormous blind spots about the environment, and it wasn't until this group, I mean, I don't know if you've read about it yet, but they really hold the Biden administration's feet to the fire. Does Biden finally do something really important, for about climate, and that's by pausing all those natural gas export plants on Louisiana and Texas coast, which now, of course, Trump has, reauthorized. Um, it that group is now taking on the Trump administration. They're getting thrown in jail, but they're not going to quit. And uh, believe me, there are more like that out there than more like, we're applauding Charlie Kirk recently. The violence that we've unleashed, and unfortunately, he was a victim to that. And interestingly, he almost predicted it. Um, this is something that we are going to be contending with. When people are scared, and everybody's scared, and I think the climate is a baseline scare that, as I said, everybody knows that it's happening, whether it's conscious or subconscious. But fear is something that demagogues exploit, and fear is something that oftentimes, gets magnified as more and more violence breaks out. This is what we are going to be facing. And I will be honest with you. I would have been a great subject for any one of you, and I could have used any one of you because when I first started this book, and I started really, really researching, and some of it, of course, I brought in from previous books, but this is terrifying stuff. I'm looking at big existential problems. Climate change, species loss. We push enough species off this planet, and suddenly we're going to be victims ourselves of extinction. And the question of how to grow enough food in a clean enough way that we don't exacerbate those other two problems is one of the biggest ones that I try to deal with this in this book. And it's not conclusive because for reasons I talked about in my previous book, Countdown, there's many more people on this planet than would naturally have been had we not improved food technology and produced much more plant life on this planet than nature could have produced. But something that ecology always tells us is that any population will always rise to meet the food supply. So here we are. And we don't want to cull anybody or kill anybody off, but one way or another, this is going to balance out. Global warming is part of what is causing that to happen. Uh, and the refugee crisis, we're going to see some enormous upheavals, and some of them are going to produce some bad fatalities. Gaza's an example of that right now. In the midst of all of that, we're still here. And I was so terrified about getting into this book, both the totality of all the stuff and how the hell am I going to write this in a coherent way. But you just start doing something. And that's what I started doing something. And by the end of this book, I found all these people who you've read about, and they uplifted me. Those Gen Z kids in climate defiance, they who took me on one of their takedowns of a big CEO, Bank of America. Um, that kind of spirit, you just can't help but be infected by it. I'm very uplifted by these people. Am
Mm.
I optimistic? I don't know. But yeah, I'm really hopeful because this ain't over and there's a lot that we can do.
I want to
Alan, I
ask
think
one.
I'm going to bring this to a close here tonight. I want to thank you very much for giving us your time and your wisdom and your wonderful book. And I think our the head of our
I have
executive committee, Robin Cooper, has a last word she'd like to give us all.
first off, Alan, thank you, thank you. And thank you for breaking it down and telling us about where things can happen through the people that you have introduced to us. Those people who are no different than we are if we use our imagination and curiosity and what you said, just do it. I'm going to bring something else up that you actually alluded to earlier. And I'm so appreciative. And if you as attendees tonight in this have been as excited about the conversation with Alan as I have, I want you to think about our little group also. We do this free. We want this to be part of what everyone can experience and think about together. But I also want to just be real with you. We do have a very limited budget. And although we bring this to you without any cost, if you've been excited, please help us by a donation if you're able to do that to our group, Climate Psychiatry Alliance. With a financial donation. And then, as Alan has said so often, just the doing the work that is so important to be a contribution to solving this, to maybe solving it. Alan, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really important. Every single human being has a contribution to make. And you guys started early. And like I say, your ideas are now in the mainstream. That's tremendous momentum. And keep it up. Thank you.
We all have to keep it up.